Hey everybody, it's Atheist for the Cause here, and I wanted to bring you some information about the DNC lawsuit because the lawyer Jared Beck, or attorney, he went on the Alex Jones channel or the InfoWars, whatever you want to call it, and he gave an interview. And wanted to offer you some other sources about what he's talking about exactly, and kind of just get the information out there. So let's take a look.
I'm now joined by Jared Beck, who is the counsel for the plaintiffs in the DNC fraud lawsuit. And Jared Beck landed on my map when he produced a video and shared it on social media requesting for witness protection for people that are serving as witnesses in the DNC fraud.
By the way, if you want to go to Jared Beck's Twitter and follow him, he posts a lot of good stuff. At Jared Beck is his Twitter.
Lawsuit case. I'm now joined by Jared Beck. Jared, I want to start the interview talking about that video. We've got a lot of things to cover, but I want to start the interview talking about that video. You made this video, you requested the judge provide witness protection to the people involved in the DNC lawsuit, the fraud lawsuit, and you actually heard back from the judge and he would not give you the counsel, he would not give you the witness protection you requested. What drove you to producing that video? What made you want to request that protection from the judge?
Well, from the outset of this case, the case has been marked.
It's kind of interesting that he didn't get witness protection or any sort of protection from the court, because there are some mysterious deaths and stuff like this, and you think that a judge would want to, be more safe than sorry in a situation like this, where there is, he's going up against some very powerful forces. So if the government did want to kill him, for instance, if somebody within the government, like the DNC wanted to kill him or someone else to protect themselves from this case, to try to make it fall apart, they would have the power to do that. And so you think the court would be on the side on the be safe, and give them the protection, even if it's not necessarily completely needed. But apparently the judge didn't find it necessary, or the judge was potentially intimidated. That's speculation, but there are some reasons to think that the judge might be intimidated, which you'll get into later. So keep that in mind.
By a series of very disturbing and concerning events, starting with the...
And one reason I like to talk about this guy is he's the attorney. This is a guy heavily involved in this case. He's gone, and he has gone to the extent to actually put this case forward. Anybody can claim anything on the internet, and you can get a lot of conspiracy theories and jumping to conclusions and stuff on the internet and poorly researched information. But when someone actually takes the time and they have credentials and they're actually putting this into the legal system, which costs money and lots of time, they've gone to a pretty extensive extent to so it's less likely that this person is just some troll with a conspiracy theory or something like that. He must believe there's something here that he could actually win.
Unexpected death of our process server, Sean Lucas, who originally served the DNC at their headquarters.
Okay, so he's saying that Sean Lucas served the DNC, and This is going to be interesting. Here is the actual video of him serving the DNC. And so we'll watch a little bit of this. It's 13 minutes long, though, so I'm just going to skip between different places.
Okay, let's go. Let's do this.
So he's meeting up with this
Alright, so you
cameraman
guys are gonna
who
witness
introduced
this.
himself earlier.
How we serving the soup.
So he's saying they're serving the suit. They walk in. They're waiting.
Big Debbie Wasserman, Ravick, Maria Durazo, Donnie Brazel, Raymond Buckley.
So there's the security guard. He's trying to get people down. And, you know, they just wait here.
Yeah, thank you.
It was actually interesting to me that that the security guard let them film for so long. I thought that they would like ban the camera instantly. So then they're just waiting and waiting. But here's a good shot. If it'll load. See these these are the papers right here of the lawsuit. So you have that, and if you want to watch this whole thing, you can, but it's a lot of just waiting, and eventually they get like the head guy. I guess I'll play this. And they get kicked out.
And now they're going to allow us. So maybe we come back to that then?
If you get in touch with the proper people, I'm sure they'll be willing to accommodate. But
Okay.
by way of doing anything live, it would have to go through public relations in the building. I would think
So that guy in the white, he's
Well,
in charge.
We have over 300 viewers. I just want to let you guys know
So-
that they told us that we can be live.
Basically, they were just kicking him out. They telling him to shut the camera off, and that's pretty much that. So let's go back to this
Last
interview.
year, and then weeks later was found.
Okay, so I wanted to set the stage a little more too. That was Sean Lucas, the bald guy, and he was the one who actually served the papers, and he's people say, you know, he's what you call a processor, and so people are saying, because he ended up dying later, so within weeks of those papers being served. So a lot of people are saying, you know, what's the big deal, because he's just a server. Like, what would killing him even gain? You know what I mean? So let's the lawyer's actually going to answer a lot of this information on why it matters. And I didn't know a lot of this stuff.
Dead on his bathroom floor by his girlfriend. We've also had the murder of Seth Rich, who very well might have been a potential witness in this case. And that's even not even getting into the issue of whether or not he was the source of the WikiLeaks documents. And so, because, you know, Seth Rich, as everyone knows, was a DNC employee, fairly high-level employee who was involved in data analysis. And so, for the purposes of our lawsuit, which alleges that the DNC rigged the primaries against Bernie Sanders and in favor of Hillary Clinton, he would have been a very, very material witness. So those are just two.
Okay, so he said that, you know, Sean Lucas, who served the papers, he died, and so that was one untimely death. And by the way, I've also read that his death, you know, it was drug related, and I've read other places that people claiming that he didn't take drugs, but you never know. A lot of times that's to protect the character, so you never really know. But there are those rumors out that he didn't really take all these different drugs.
Of the disturbing events that happened shortly after we filed the lawsuit last year, after the Guccifer 2.0 documents came out. And then...
Oh, yeah, and then you have the Seth Rich death, untimely, which he's saying that, you know, there's the WikiLeaks issue, but even if you take, you know, even if you don't think Seth Rich was the leaker, or you don't think it can be proven that he was, it doesn't matter in terms of his case, which is just that the Democrats rigged the primary against Bernie Sanders. And so there's a, you know, if you don't like WikiLeaks or whatever, just put all that stuff aside. Seth Rich would still be a witness in this lawsuit, or at least written down as a potential witness, a material witness, because he was an IT guy who had access to lots of information. He was relatively high within the Democratic Party.
More recently, we've had a series of concerning events happen closer to home here in South Florida, where the attorneys are located. We had a very strange call that was made to our office, which showed the number for Debbie Wasserman.
Okay, so first he's getting into these lawyers that were murdered, and I'm gonna play a little clip from this YouTube channel because this is where I originally found this information, and then I'll get into the articles a little bit.
The home ground of Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, and indeed right now the DNC fraud lawsuit. Well, I just want to speculate something for a moment. I'm not going to go into really wild speculation, but my point in this video is, if you're in Miami or if you're in Florida, it's a really bad place to be a lawyer at the moment, it would seem. It seems that a number of these individuals are actually turning up dead. Here you have June the 5th, Miami Beach defense attorney dies 4 days after hit and run crash. So think about that for a moment. That's rather strange, but you might say, well, that's just an anomaly here. This individual was hit by a hit and run. The motorist driving 100 miles an hour, etc. Was born in
100 miles an hour, that's pretty crazy. That's fast.
59.
In the city.
Has relations there back in Brooklyn. In fact, Brooklyn, New York. This individual has passed away, sadly. Of course, rest in peace. He had significant injuries from the hit and run itself. Then we have this individual who...
That last guy's injuries were terrible, like severed spine and all kinds of terrible injuries.
June the 9th, extremely famous lawyer, noted South Florida litigator, died. Here you have him, death at 57. This individual's so famous it set shockwaves through the actual legal community in Florida itself. This individual reported by the police department there in Florida.
Okay, so basically this is the second lawyer. He is a civil rights attorney. And then I want to get to the third one here quickly.
Coming back to May the 30th, just before the individual was hit by a car. You have a federal prosecutor found dead on where? Hollywood Beach in Florida. This is
okay, so that's really what I wanted to show. And now to go to the, this is the one article where basically this guy, he was killed after he was in a car and he got hit from behind at 100 miles an hour. But I did look up some information on this, and this was the driver. Basically, this guy has a history of, like, he was on probation for distributing cocaine or conspiracy to distribute cocaine, something like that. And he, they're in this particular county, it's actually, they face, like, tons of hit and run crimes. So they actually made the laws stricter because they were like leading the state or something in hit and run crimes with a crazy number. So it's actually like not this. I really couldn't find a connection to him and Debbie Wasserman-Schultz or anything like that. He was just like a defense lawyer of the poor, basically. And then, although, you know, they said that the only thing about him was that he sounded like a very virtuous guy. That's what pretty much everybody was saying. All the articles were saying is he is a virtuous guy, and sometimes virtuous people can be very problematic and get in the way of powerful people. But I don't have any evidence that he was involved. So this guy, the defense attorney, he really, there isn't much here in terms of evidence so far. Then you have this guy, and he's a civil lawyer. This is a little more gray because he like committed suicide, and the attorney group he worked for basically said that he was quietly battling mental illness. The law firm disclosed this, and I'm like, why would you disclose it? If he was quietly battling mental illness, probably most people didn't know about it. So why would you go out after he dies and say, oh yeah, you know, he was battling mental illness? I mean, that seems like a weird time to say this. You could have just not said anything and, you know, let him, because this kind of like damages his reputation. It's weird to say this. And then so that was the main thing. Apparently he suffered from depression, but and they say they tried to be supportive, but it doesn't seem like, I don't know, how'd you try to be supportive? He ended up apparently killing himself, so why didn't you step in, you know, more harshly? And so that's, you know, a little issue. What the other guy said in the YouTube video is like he sued for lots of money, and he had like $65 million verdict here, and I really couldn't find too much. I didn't look too hard, but from what I was looking at, there wasn't much of a connection to like Debbie Wasserman-Schultz or the DNC or anything like that. But and if evidence comes to light, I'd be interested in seeing it, but I just haven't seen it yet. Although the interesting thing is, I'm pretty sure both these guys were actually in Debbie Wasserman-Schultz's district. So that is a little weird. But then the third guy is here's an article about him. This is the most serious one that basically, well, I have a video from the Zach Heller affair, and Zach Heller talks about it, so I'm going to let him talk for a little bit and then go over this other article.
Was investigating visa and passport fraud in the same district where Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, who's a congresswoman, is under. So she's the defendant of the DNC fraud lawsuit. The DNC is also being sued for paying $1 million bonuses while shorting their ground staff, just basic payments. And she's also under an investigation based on the Awan brothers, some of her IT staffers who have fled the country after having stolen devices and God knows what else. And also the Seth Rich murder investigation is happening or not right now. Obviously, there's a lot that's coming down on Debbie Wasserman-Schultz right now, so it's really just a weird thing that there's now another mysterious death, and it was a crime, and this guy was shot in the head.
Okay, so that has to do with the lawyer was investigating like green cards and things like that, And so let's go over the Awan brothers. Says a criminal suspect in an investigation into major security breach on the House of Representatives computer network has abruptly left the country and gone to Pakistan, where her family has significant assets and VIP level protection, a relative and others told the Daily Caller News Foundation's investigative group. Hina Alvi, her husband Imran Awan, and his brothers Abid and Jamal were highly paid shared IT administrators working for multiple House Democrats until their access to congressional IT systems was terminated February 2nd as a result of the investigation. Capitol Police confirmed the investigation is ongoing, but no arrests have been reported in the case. The Awans are accused of stealing equipment from members' offices without their knowledge and committing serious, potentially illegal violations on the House IT network, according to Politico. Many of the Democrats, I don't really care for Politico, but when they're saying something negative about the DNC, it's bad. Many of the Democrats who employed the Awans are members of the House Committee on Homeland Security, the Committee on Foreign Affairs, and the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Their positions gave them access to members' emails and confidential files. In addition, Imran was given the password for an iPad used by then Democratic National Committee Chairman Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, a Florida Democrat. The five came to the U.S. from Pakistan. Since the investigation became public, the Awans have abruptly moved from longtime homes, and basically they fled the country to Pakistan. Jilani said in court documents the Awan brothers have convinced Pakistani officials that they are VIPs and travel the country with a police motorcade, an assertion that seemingly gives them a major incentive to seek protection there, as well as raising questions about how the computer jockeys obtain that status. Other court documents and multiple people involved in various financial disputes with Imran told the DCNF that he was quick to represent himself as from the U.S. Congress in personal matters. The family received more than $4 million in congressional pay, yet their lifestyles in the U.S. were not overly luxurious. Jilani said significant assets were stored in Pakistan. Of course, none of this looks good. They're making all this money, but they're not spending any. It kind of gives the idea that they were, doing harm to the United States with the plan on going back to Pakistan eventually. And who knows, possibly even working for foreign agents, or, who knows how far this rabbit hole goes, but when Imran and Hina moved out of their 3,200 square foot home in Lorton, Imran told a neighbor he was moving into a home his father, who died January 16th, previously occupied. They lived there 9 years, the neighbor told the DCNF. I saw a moving truck a month ago, and he said he was moving to his dad's house. Abid also moved out of his longtime Springfield home, the new tenants told the DCNF. Jilani and Abid moved into their deceased father's home with his wife and kids, and Imran moved in as well, but without his family. A third family also lives in the 2,400 square foot house, further indicating that Imran's wife and kids are unlikely to be joining him. A female African immigrant at Shah's house, and she began renting a portion of the house in April with her numerous children. The Springfield home is where Jilani, the stepmother, lived with the Awan's father until his death. She fled after the brothers threatened to have her relatives in Pakistan kidnapped if she didn't cooperate in a financial scheme, she told the DCNF, echoing statements made in court documents. So there's a lot going on with these Awan brothers. A large U.S. House, or Awan brothers, I think it's pronounced, a large U.S. House of Representatives seal is now displayed prominently on a first-floor window of the house. Imran, who has worked for Wasserman-Schultz since 2005, Boas stated he had many contacts in USA and Pakistan also. He also said that if I called even the whole US police on them, he would not face consequences, Jelani told the DCNF. Imran Awan threatened that he is very powerful and would use that power to have people kidnapped in Pakistan, she said in court documents. Tenants of one property Hina owns said she has been unable to pick up rent recently and has not returned calls. All contact with her turned off, the tenant said. The switch off to dealing with Imran instead was odd. Imran ordered the renters not to cooperate with law enforcement, the renter said, adding that he told them to begin making out rent in the form of a blank check and giving it to a realtor. A spokesman for the Capitol Police declined to comment for the story. So, there's a lot of shit going on here. And what do you know, these Awan brothers that are involved in all of this shit, who work for Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, are acting in ways where they're threatening people, allegedly, and threatening their families and all kinds of stuff. And they might have even been spies or corrupted. But they were involved in the IT department, and there's investigations into them. So, you know, these Awan brothers, something is, they're in some deep, deep stuff. So you have that. And so none of this looks good. I think it's just interesting, too, because this is how Debbie Wasserman-Schultz acts. Like, surrounding her, there are all these deaths, and she goes and threatens people. I don't have the video right now, but she, like, if you look at one of my older videos, she openly threatens the Capitol Police chief. And she says she wants this a laptop back, and he says basically he can't give it back, and she's like, well, there will be consequences. That's what she said. There will be consequences. Right out in the open. How can you imagine if you or I said that? So, but you know, you basically have this going on, and this guy was involved in like looking up green cards, like green card fraud and stuff. So I don't know if it's potentially connected to the ones, and you know, they were the ones were getting like illegal green cards, or some people think that voter fraud was happening in Debbie Wasserman-Schultz's district. There's a lot of theories out there, no hard conclusions yet, but there's plenty of reason to be suspicious on why this guy on this guy's death. Not only was it a straight up murder, like, you know, this guy was an accident. That's, you know, somewhat believable. This guy was a suicide, somewhat believable, little more gray, but still somewhat believable. This guy was murdered. This is like the most obvious of wrongdoing, you know? Even if it was like some random murder or something, there was still an actual murder. And and you have the Seth Rich murder was an actual murder too. But Seth Rich was a DNC IT guy, an operative, which is interesting too, because so are the Awan brothers. But the other three, this guy, and this guy, were all lawyers in Debbie Wasserman-Schultz's district. So, you know, that's interesting. So let's continue.
Wasserman-Schultz's office in Aventura, Florida. Now, we don't know who or what was behind the actual call, but we've been told at this point that the matter has been referred to the Capitol Police for investigation. We've also had threats made to counsel. We've had, in the course of those threats, the name of a federal prosecutor by the name of Barrington Wiesnett invoked, and he was found washed up on the beach in Hollywood, dead. And
This is the black lawyer that I said. You know, he was investigating like the visa fraud stuff, and his is like the most suspicious of all, and his name was apparently invoked.
this is not only Debbie Wasserman-Schultz's home district, but this is the court where the DNC fraud lawsuit is pending. So we've had a series of very, very, very concerning events, and that's what prompted us to file the motion that we filed with the court.
So there's
among
the
other things.
yeah, there's the water.
And again, this guy, you know, he's actually filing motions in court. You don't file a motion for protection in court unless you feel you really need it, like unless you're actually worried. And there are all kinds of you know, there are interviews and stuff that you can find online where, you know, these people are, you can hear their people connected to these cases are actually worried, you know, and these attorneys are like very flustered and whenever they're talking about this to people. So, but it seems like they want to go more and more public to basically shine a light on them and protect them, because, you know, the court denied their protection. That's the best kind of protection they can have at this point, is having the whole country or whole world knowing about the situation. Because then if they do show up dead or something, it raises really big suspicions.
Front from Jared Beck again. He is the counsel for the plaintiffs in the DNC fraud lawsuit. And I want to go back to the Debbie Wasserman-Schultz thing for a second, because this is key. One, it's, if I recall correctly, they tried to call your office and pretend it wasn't them. Is that accurate?
Well, we don't know who or what was behind the call. What we do know is that one of our employees received a call, and the caller ID showed up upon further investigation. It was linked to Debbie Wasserman-Schultz's office in Aventura, but the caller was using some type of voice recognition or voice masking technology to disguise the voice. So it sounded very, very robotic to our employee and very, very concerning. And they were asking a whole series of questions about the DNC fraud lawsuit. And so we immediately brought that to the court's attention. And this was even before.
So he's not going to say that Debbie Wasserman-Schultz did it, but the facts are that someone called their office with a number. They forgot to check, you know, they forgot to block the caller ID. They masked their voice, and then they asked a bunch of questions about the case, which in order to ask a bunch of questions about the case, you need to know a bunch of information about the case. And then so they're clearly knowledgeable about the case. And they when they looked up that number on their caller ID, it traced back to Debbie Wasserman-Schultz's office. Okay, so that he's not going to say that she was the one that called, but it seems very strongly that either she called or someone connected very close to her likely called to basically find information out about probably to gauge how close they are to cracking this case.
We filed the motion for protection with the court.
And Debbie Wasserman-Schultz has been up to some other shenanigans as well. She's been threatening people that have been looking into the Seth Rich murder, threatening people that are doing the investigation into the DNC lawsuit, then the strange phone call that you had. And then yesterday, or I think it was Wednesday, she came out and accused James Comey and Jay Johnson of perjury. Huge accusation coming from Debbie Wasserman-Schultz. See, she seems to be losing it right now.
Okay, so about that, Jared Beck, the lawyer, the attorney, he posted this, and I wanted to show you the video because it's really interesting. It's about Debbie Wasserman-Schultz basically going after Jay Johnson, which is interesting because Jay Johnson was appointed under Barack Obama, and he worked in like the Department of Justice in the past and a couple of different departments, and then he ended up at the Department of Homeland Security. So you would think that Jay Johnson would basically be on the side of Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, like they're basically friends. But it's kind of, so it's interesting that they're going at each other. But let's listen to Debbie Wasserman-Schultz here. If it'll play.
Something else has been happening.
There we go.
Happened on Capitol Hill. The former Secretary of Homeland Security testified yesterday about the Russian hacks during the election, and he.
What do you know? CNN, and they're talking about Russia. That's all CNN talks about.
Flat out said that the DNC refused his department's help. You put out a statement afterward, basically saying that Jay Johnson was wrong. Where is he wrong?
He's wrong in every respect.
I'm gonna go back because this is important.
Jay Johnson was wrong. Where is he wrong?
Oh, I didn't go back far enough.
The DNC refused his department's help. You put out.
So the DNC refused Jay Johnson's and his department, his help. His department's help. So that's pretty interesting. Because you'd think that with all the stuff that was going on with the DNC, that they would want help if there was no wrongdoing, wouldn't you?
Out a statement afterward, basically saying that Jay Johnson was wrong. Where is he wrong?
He's wrong in every respect. Let me just be very clear. At no point during my tenure at the DNC was I contacted by the FBI, DHS, or any government agency, or alerted or made aware that they.
Did you see that? Did you? Body language is so telling in interviews. Did you see the CNN host? Like, this CNN is as friendly as she's gonna get, pretty much. And watch the host like, are you kidding me? Are you really making this argument? Like, the FBI, basically no main investigative agencies can't ever even contacted you. So let's I'm gonna rewind it a little bit and just watch the change, her head change and her body posture change. It's really interesting.
DHS or any government agency, or alerted or made aware that they believed that the Russians, an enemy state, was intruding on our network. At no point, and I am a member of Congress who had the ability to sit down and be briefed in a classified setting. Even Director Comey testified publicly that he wished that he had gone to the top of the organization. We're one of the two national political parties. It is astounding that when they had a member of Congress who was leading that organization, that no one felt it was any more important when we had a foreign enemy intruding on one of the two political parties' networks to do anything more than lob a phone call in to our tech support through our main switchboard.
But how can both
That's
be
outrageous.
true?
The fact that she makes it sound so simple, like someone could have helped so simply with a phone call, like that almost makes you wonder, how could she have not have been contacted? Like, what's actually more likely? She was not contacted at all, and Debbie Wasserman-Schultz is, the one telling the truth, and everybody else are liars or completely incompetent? Or is it that she's a fucking liar? I think it's more likely that she's a fucking liar.
I mean, Secretary Johnson says the DNC rebuffed the help that they offered. You're saying that no one ever contacted you.
So Jay Johnson said that he did offer help, and the DNC turned it down. Who are we gonna believe here? I mean, I know Jay Johnson isn't the most credible person, but when it's between him and Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, you know, I was kind of thinking about this, and it's like, what's going on here? I wouldn't be surprised if some Democrats want to basically throw Debbie Wasserman-Schultz under the bus and try to move on, because there's a lot of evidence, it seems, of wrongdoing, and a lot of it stems from her, and she's been exposed more than anybody. She's becoming a major liability. And one of her biggest friends, Hillary Clinton, is also not, you know, she costed the party dearly, Hillary Clinton did. And Hillary Clinton has lost a ton of power. And there's a huge power struggle within the Democratic Party right now. And, you know, why are people, you know, why would the DNC or other Democrats within the Democratic Party continue to blindly back her, you know, when it doesn't seem so obvious anymore that she's going to get away with everything?
Respectfully, Secretary Johnson is utterly misinformed. That is simply not accurate. And
look at that. When you've got nothing else to do, when you've got no rebuttal to, you know, how you turn down the help, the offer for help, now you're just gonna attack Jay Johnson to try to get the heat off of you. But come on, do you really think that our top organizations like the FBI and Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice, that they didn't come and try to help here?
Much that has been written about the timeline of events by the New York Times, the Washington Post, that document.
Oh, by the Washington Post and the New York Times. Well, if you ask me, that's evidence for Jay Johnson.
Through multiple sources, including me, that
she just cited herself. She cited an article that used her as a source.
the FBI and other federal agencies did virtually nothing to make sure that when they were aware, at the point that they were aware that there was or concern.
So, Jared Beck basically said, everyone is a liar but her, right? That is like, you couldn't do it better than that. So let's get back to this.
She might be a weak link in the entire facade that I think is being orchestrated right now, that revolves around these 3 deaths, which prompted you to request the judge in this case to provide witness protection. Let's go back to Sean Lucas for a second now.
It'll be really interesting to see what happens with Debbie Wasserman-Schultz if she gets reelected in 2018. Or, I mean, if she's even still in office. If the heat doesn't come down before then, I wouldn't be surprised if the government kind of just lets us go until 2018 and see, and then they can see if the Democrats take care of it in-house and maybe run a primary against her. You know, just because you have an incumbent doesn't mean you can't still run other Democrats against them, and so it'd be interesting. Or maybe a Republican beats her out, and so it'll be interesting to see what happens. And if the authorities do that, they can like get rid of Debbie Wasserman-Schultz out of the government anyway, in a way that wouldn't be so like publicly humiliating to basically the U.S. government. And it would be a lot cheaper, and there are lots of benefits, like you have to have a lot of evidence to go to court and actually win, you know. And going to court is always an uphill battle against people in power.
Because I've thought more about this, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, because Seth Rich has been kind of the focal point. And I think that's because with Seth Rich, it's, it looks like cold blood murder. The picture that was painted by the media is that, he's basically shot dead in the middle of the street. Now, that's not...
I think that's actually, there's a good point to be taken from this. Yeah, Seth Rich has been the focal point. I think people have to be careful not to focus just on Seth Rich, because, I mean, what new information is coming out anyways? Like, you have to expand out from there and, get into these other people that are suspicious. And then sometimes when you're on a case and you have, like, Seth Rich is suspicious, you did something that got it, that is what got you into an investigation. And then information kind of stopped coming in to an extent. So then you start looking in at another arm potentially, and there's this attorney that got killed, and all of a sudden that starts spreading out, and then sometimes they connect, and it's like, oh, this is what's going on. And when you have what I've learned when I've done some citizen investigations is that when you go down two different paths and they connect, that's when you really have something. Like, you knew they might connect, but you didn't know how or anything, and you weren't trying to force them to connect. You were just kind of going where it goes, and they do connect. That's always very intriguing. And usually there's a lot more evidence then. When they connect, all of a sudden it usually opens up a whole litany of extra evidence, and everything seems more clear.
Not exactly what happened. It turned out he was shot, and then he was actually still conscious when he was taken to the hospital, and then we have no idea what happened to the hospital or what hospital he went to. You can get into that too, but I'm curious, with Sean Lucas, there hasn't been as much attention with Sean Lucas. What do you think is going on with or is there an investigation into the death of Sean Lucas? This is the man that served Debbie Wasserman-Schultz in the famous YouTube video. Why do you think there hasn't been much talk or much investigation?
Now remember, before I said that with Sean Lucas, a lot of people think that Sean Lucas, or, people will make the argument that Sean Lucas was just a processor and isn't that important. This is where he's going to explain that Sean Lucas is much more than just a processor, and it's pretty interesting.
Into Sean Lucas's death.
Well, I'll tell you what we know in terms of facts, and then people can draw their own conclusions. After we received news of Sean Lucas's death, and people have to understand that Sean Lucas was not just the process server in this case, but he, like Seth Rich, was also a sorry, that's my phone. He, like Seth Rich, was a potential witness in the case, because at the time that he was found dead, the defendants were contesting service of process as being valid. And so when that happens, and this is a very, very unusual motion to be seen filed in a lawsuit where the defendant actually contests service of process. But when the defendant files a motion like that, the process server becomes a witness. And so he was not just a process server, but he was also a potential witness in the case at the time he was found dead on his bathroom floor by his girlfriend. And so we got in touch with the DC police.
By the way, I would also argue that he became one of the faces of the lawsuit. When he put that video online and it got a bunch of hits and stuff, nobody knew who Sean Lucas was before, in terms of, unless you knew him personally. Like, this wasn't some famous guy. And now, I wouldn't say he's a household name, but people who look into the DNC lawsuit and stuff, they certainly know who he is. Like, he's become one of the biggest faces of the entire lawsuit. And, if you wanted to send a message too, you could end up killing the guy who came into your office to serve you in the DNC, and and who live streamed it online and got really famous. His face was out there, and then you go, and all of a sudden he ends up dead. That sounds quite a message, doesn't it? And I'm not saying that Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, or someone else connected to her did kill him. It's not, 100% clear, but there's enough to be suspicious because of the timing and some other stuff you'll talk about.
Police, which also had jurisdiction over the inquest into Sean Lucas's death. And what we learned from the DC police after much communication back and forth was that an examination or an autopsy was conducted. Although we've never gotten access to the autopsy, we did get access to a summary, I believe, of toxicology that was done as part of whatever autopsy was conducted. But there were 3 different substances found in his body at his autopsy. And I'm not a medical doctor, but we've been told by many people, including people who say that they're doctors and that they have experience with this kind of stuff, and they told us that this is a very unusual combination of substances.
So, one weird thing that I find about this, I guess I kind of thought of the reason why, but it's kind of weird to me that he's like referencing people who have who basically, it sounds like people online who have basically said, hey, I've worked with chemicals and stuff, or like I'm a doctor or something, and they told him that this is a strange combination of chemicals. But why wouldn't he just go to someone he knows who is actually a professional and get their expert opinion? I mean, doesn't that seem like something you'd want to do? But so it's kind of strange to me that he's citing these people he doesn't seem to know. But I mean, I think the reason that might be is he said they're not in the discovery process yet of this case. So that might be something he does in the future, potentially. It might not be like a top priority at this point.
And that there is something unusual about this report. But that's all we know about, the facts surrounding Sean Lucas's death. So it's very unusual, and sort of in contrast to Seth Rich, with Seth Rich, you're talking about, so many issues going on in terms of, who leaked the documents or how these documents got into the public domain.
Well, I'm curious too, with the death of Sean Lucas, before we go down Seth Rich, has there been anything odd other than the autopsy report, the toxicology report showing those substances in his system? Has there been anything else odd? For example, with Seth Rich, we can't get access to the information, what hospital he went to, or anything that transpired with his trip to the hospital. Has there been anything like that in the Sean Lucas death investigation as well? Have there been any information that they're not sharing with you? Anything that raises red flags?
Well, it's really outside of our jurisdiction. I mean, we're not, pursuing if there's something, we're told that it's been ruled an accident. So my understanding is that there's no criminal investigation of any kind going on with the death of Sean Lucas, because it's already been determined to be an accident by these toxicology findings. What I am saying is that we've gotten many messages from people who say that there's something funny going on with those findings in terms of the substances that have been, in terms of the substances that were found, in terms of potential issues with the autopsy panel, it being unusual, for example, to test for kratom in an autopsy panel because it's not associated with death. I mean, that's one, but I have no way to evaluate this. And again, it's not, we're just pursuing the DNC fraud case. If there's a criminal investigation here, then that has to be something.
Isn't that kind of convenient? Because Sean Lucas allegedly, died of these drugs or whatever, because they made a determination. There's no longer a criminal investigation, and so he's having a tough time getting information about it, basically.
That the criminal authorities pursue, and that's just not something that's within our purview.
Because the thing is, it's not just that there's no longer criminal investigation. It's that there's reason to suspect that the conclusion was wrong. But I mean, he's not directly related to, he's not taking on the case of Sean Lucas's death. So it's really outside of what he's doing to challenge the conclusion. And so that's a bit problematic and convenient for the opposition that's in power, such as Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, potentially.
Yeah, and you said it there too. You said, okay, Sean Lucas's death was an accident. Well, you know what? We might buy that if it wasn't Seth Rich's death was also an accident, and if it wasn't Barrington Wisenant's death that was...
Well, I don't really like what he says here, because Seth Rich was murdered. That wasn't an accident. The lawyer was murdered. That wasn't an accident. Only one of them was an accident. The other two, were alleged accidents. Or the other two were actual crimes. So I know what he's trying to say, but it didn't come out right. So he's basically trying to say that there's no evidence of wrongdoing in any of these cases outside of the direct murders.
It was also an accident. I think when you look at all three of them, all of a sudden an accident doesn't seem like the likely odds. Now let's get back into Seth Rich. Let's talk about...
Or maybe it's better to say there's no direct connection to this DNC lawsuit and their murders.
His role with the DNC, because they want to use this term staffer. They say DNC staffer. Well, he was more important than that. He wasn't just an average staffer. He had access to voter registration, voter logs. This is something that could have been very key to the lawsuit.
Right.
Now, this is actually interesting, because people who talked about the DNC or about Seth Rich were largely happy to call him a DNC staffer, because it really flows off the tongue. It's DNC staffer murdered, walking home. People can remember that easily, and it connects it directly to the DNC. But at the same time, then you don't realize all the connections to the DNC lawsuit and how important he was, because it sounds like he's a low-level guy, but he's actually a quite high-level guy in the DNC, dealing with the IT department, and he had lots of information that other people just wouldn't have if you weren't in the IT department.
Absolutely. That's such an important point. Even before you start getting into the issue of how did WikiLeaks get the documents. Obviously, there's a prevailing mainstream media narrative that keeps getting pounded over again and again that they came from Russia. And of course, the evidence that they came from Russia is, in my view, it's quickly evaporating. But, the counter narrative to that.
The DNC is in some really serious trouble here, because they have the mainstream media on their side, and to be honest, they have the deep state largely on their side. But outside of that, they have they're going up against not only the right, like, you know, all of the Trump voters and the people who fell on the right, even a lot of the never Trumpers, like, don't believe in the Russian narrative. But not only that, a lot of the progressives, and like this guy's, you know, doing the DNC lawsuit, which is, you know, the lawsuit isn't from the right or the conservatives. This lawsuit is coming from within the Democratic Party itself. You know, it's a lawsuit of the progressives, who are the up-and-comers, against the old liberal establishment that's been corporatized and corrupted. And so it's the progressives and the right taking a stance against basically the liberal establishment.
That the mainstream media won't tell you about is that you know, they were leaked from the inside, and of course Seth Rich, being an employee at the level that you just stated, would have been a possible source for that. But even before you get to the issue of, which in my mind is at the very least unsettled, but even before you get to the issue of who leaked the documents, you get to the issue of potential witnesses in this case. And you are absolutely correct. You know, had he not been murdered, Seth Rich would have been listed, assuming this case gets to discovery, and we don't know if it's going to get to discovery because we're subject to a pending motion to dismiss. But if this case were to get to discovery, we would list, without any doubt in my mind, we would list Seth Rich on our Rule 26 federal disclosures as a potential material witness in this case. And of course, so, you know, you put that together with Sean Lucas, and you've got two potential witnesses in a federal case, one murdered, one dying unexpectedly with potential questions about the autopsy and the conclusions of those autopsy. You have two potential witnesses in a major federal case dying under very, very concerning circumstances in rapid succession. That's what you have.
Now, it sounds a little suspicious when you say it like that, doesn't it? And that's not even including the attorney that died in W. Wasserman-Schultz's district. And the other two that are less likely to be connected, but still you can throw them on, like all these attorneys are dying in the area. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, and it's interesting too to put it out that way. I think sounds a little more, I don't know, radical or catchy, if you will, because people say, okay, maybe Seth Rich was the leaker, maybe he wasn't. We really don't know. You can sit here and you can debate that all day long. But when you say, hey, look, there's an ongoing class action lawsuit against the DNC for fraud, and you have two witnesses, star witnesses, that would have been serving in that case are dead. I think that's kind of a different narrative that might kind of get people's intellect thinking a little bit more like, well, wait a second, witnesses in a huge case, that could be a big deal. And the key here to me is what we're dealing with, in my view, is Hillary Clinton and her people stole the election from the selection from Bernie Sanders of the Democrats. Sanders had the popularity. Seth Rich probably knew that Sanders even had most of the votes based on the data that he had. And so now you're looking at a case where not only are they trying to rig elections, but they're trying to obstruct justice as well.
Yeah, I mean,
another thing is about this is never. I'll just.
You called it radical. I don't think this is radical at all. I mean, I'm just stating facts here. Facts that the mainstream media has done everything in its power to suppress and to even question the Seth Rich murder investigation, which is ongoing. To even ask questions about it, you are labeled a conspiracy theorist.
Welcome to our world. Welcome to the world of anybody who has criticized the DNC in the last couple of years. They're all conspiracy theorists. That's all the mainstream media says. It's kind of funny too, because someone like him, he's just doing his job. I bet he didn't really expect, and he might not really understand the full strategy of the DNC to try to discredit anybody, and the mainstream media to try to discredit anybody who criticizes the Democrats by simply saying, oh, they're conspiracy theorists. At some point, the public, and I think it's already happening, the public's going to wake up to it, though, because you can only call people conspiracy theorists for so long. But one point I was going to make on the DNC lawsuit is, for those of you who don't really know what it is, or if you're still confused, basically it's just they're doing a class action lawsuit to, the donors are of Bernie Sanders, because the issue here is the donors of Bernie Sanders gave Bernie Sanders money under the context that, he would have a fair shot at winning the primary. And the DNC literally rigged the primary, where there's all kinds of evidence that they were trying to come up with narrative. They were colluding and coming up with narratives together, and they were saying, oh, maybe you should go after. There was an email where it said oh, maybe you should talk about Bernie Sanders, how he's an atheist, and he calls, he was calling himself a Jew because he's a secular Jew, and attack him on that. And that shows collusion, and that shows that it wasn't a fair election, and there were lots of things that caused this unfairness, basically, where the DNC was definitely helping Hillary Clinton. I remember when they actually took the voter list away from Bernie Sanders, saying that one of his people wrongfully accessed confidential information on Hillary Clinton's voter list, basically. And I think Bernie Sanders did actually fire the staffer, but they basically wouldn't let Bernie Sanders access the information, which is way too harsh of a punishment for that happening, because it can be any rogue person. There was nothing showing that Bernie Sanders gave him direction to do that or anything. And it was conveniently right before the one of the elections took place, so he didn't have proper access to voter information, and it obviously that would hurt him to get out the vote right before, which is the most damaging time that could happen.
By the mainstream media, which I think is outrageous.
Now, we'll go down that road in a second here, but I want to ask you about this pending motion to dismiss. Are you telling me right now that they're trying to bury this lawsuit?
Yes, I mean, this is
very, very important, because this is where the Sean Lucas death seems to make the most sense. This is why, if you're wondering why Sean Lucas matters, this is gonna tell you the most about why he matters, and why his death would not only help the DNC win the case, but it would do far more than just win the case.
Second motion to dismiss. The first motion to dismiss was filed last year because they were trying to do everything in their power to not have the major issues in this lawsuit come out during the general election. So they filed the first motion to dismiss, which was this very, very unusual motion to dismiss for lack of service of process or proper service of process. And then more recently, they filed a second motion to dismiss based on a whole litany of so-called theories, which suggests that the court has no power to or subject matter jurisdiction to even adjudicate this dispute, which means that they don't even want us to get to the discovery stage, much less have a trial.
Which to me is, again, another example of obstruction of justice. Now, I want to go to Barrington Wisenant, who was in Florida, as you said, close to where...
So, the whole point here is I think they talk about it more later, but basically, they filed a motion to dismiss the case. And then, you know, that the processor would be a witness. So Sean Lucas would have been a witness. So then he ended up dying, right? So then they filed to dismiss the case again. And now what the dismissing the case would be, and now, you know, Sean Lucas isn't here either to be the witness for the case, but if they're successful in getting it dismissed, then you can never get to the discovery stage. And in terms of the DNC, it would destroy the DNC, it sounds like, unless the DNC can keep this under wraps somehow, where he could go and ask anybody, any potential witness, questions, and then, you know, give that information to the court and, you know, as evidence, and then so he can go and basically expose the hell out of the DNC. And if he exposed the DNC like that, even if the DNC won, they would be so exposed from him just releasing, you know, all this information from witnesses that, because, you know, the DNC, even if you don't think the DNC did wrong here, which I don't know how you could think that, but you know the DNC is into some shady shit. So, you know, the only thing that can really save the DNC at this point is that this entire case gets dismissed, which is effectively a win for them. And remember also, Debbie Wasserman-Schultz is also named on this lawsuit. So it's the DNC and Debbie Wasserman-Schultz herself. So, you know, that's why she's going out and making appearances. Like, this is literally, she has the most to lose out of anybody in the DNC.
Where you're at in Hollywood.
And it's not just picking on her. If anybody tries to use the misogynist term or anything, or you know, going after a woman, she's the one who is the campaign chair. That's why she's named individually.
County there. What was his role in all of this?
Or, I'm sorry, not the campaign chair, the DNC chair. She was the DNC chair at the time that this happened. The campaign chair was of Hillary Clinton's campaign was John Podesta. Sorry, I misspoke.
Well, he has no role in our case, but what I can tell you is that our co-counsel, who received a very, very...
I'm going to rewind it so you know who they're talking about.
Dispute, which means that they don't even want us to get to the discovery stage, much less have a trial.
Which to me is, again, another example of obstruction of justice. Now, I want to go to Barrington Wisenant, who was in Florida, as you said, close to where you're at, in Hollywood County there. What was his role in all of this?
This is back to that attorney that was killed in the in Debbie Wasserman-Schultz's district, that was killed on the beach by trauma to the head, possibly gunshot or possibly like a bludgeon or something to that effect.
This.
Well, he has no role in our case, but what I can tell you is that our co-counsel, who received a very, very, very threatening and concerning voicemail on his phone, and that person, whoever was calling him, told him that, basically he was going to wind up like Barrington Wiseman, that federal prosecutor who just washed up on the beach in Hollywood. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the phone call that my co-counsel received, and so it was very, very concerning.
Now, it's hard to know whether this is just some random, maybe some random Democrat voter or something that liked Hillary Clinton that is, threatening them now or something. But, it's hard to know whether it's that or, someone actually involved in the case that has something to gain from intimidating them. Either way, it's normally, you can expect some sort of threat or something like that, like online or something like that, and usually it's not that serious. But in a case like this where so many people are winding up dead and stuff, I think everything has to be taken seriously. And it's not being a special snowflake. There actually are people being killed in this area regularly.
Okay, so he technically doesn't have any role necessarily cemented in this case. However, as a Florida prosecuting attorney and somebody that was looking into, I think it was visas, people that were coming here to work, potential maybe illegal voters, possibly. Maybe he had some intel on that. I don't know if you know anything about that, but that's kind of where my mind went with that. I'm curious if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, I have no idea what he was working on as a federal prosecutor here in South Florida, which is, where our case is being litigated. But I do know this about him.
By the way, he was a federal prosecutor. He was new to being a federal prosecutor. He was some sort of lawyer and had just become, he just transferred to become a federal prosecutor. So that's kind of, I don't know if that matters. It's just kind of an interesting note at this point.
I believe he was a 37-year-old man with 3 kids. He had just finished his first trial on, at the U.S. Attorney's Office. He was a friend of a friend of ours, so he was somebody who was very, very well known in the legal community down here, very, very respected, and he just washed up on the beach in Hollywood with blunt force trauma to the back of his head, and as of this day, nobody seems to know what happened to him, and it's very, very concerning.
Isn't it also amazing that these victims are pretty high profile? Sure, we might not have known about them, but I mean, a federal prosecutor is pretty high profile for, still, and so that should raise the priority status of these murders. And yet, Seth Rich, this federal prosecutor, and a lot of these deaths, they never get solved. Seth Rich's death is still unsolved, and it's just kind of interesting. On top of that, in one of the articles, it stated that this federal prosecutor, despite him dying, I thought the FBI would be involved in this, but apparently the Miami branch, Miami's FBI branch, wasn't involved in investigating this. I don't know, maybe there was a different FBI branch that was, but someone had called the FBI in Miami, and they said they weren't involved. So that's interesting.
And that's the same story that we're getting from the Seth Rich death and the Sean Lucas death. Jared, I know that you actually had a lot of negative feedback, a lot of backlash for doing this interview. I want to thank you for doing this interview with me. But I want to hear your thoughts on this, because I think what we're talking about here...
It's kind of ridiculous. Okay, so where I fall on the spectrum is I'm actually a liberal. I'm not a progressive. I believe in individual rights. And and the way I would describe a progressive is someone who believes more, they're more for the group. They want equality of outcome, where I want equality of opportunity. And so I'm not really like, I'm basically on the side of like the DNC establishment is where I align with. The Hillary Clinton's, Obama's, I voted for Obama twice. That's where I would align. However, they're so corrupted, and they've become so corporatized that I don't really align myself with the liberal establishment. And it's kind of interesting when you think about it like that. Like, it's pretty much, and there's a lot of people like me. I ended up voting Obama twice and then voted for Trump, and I'm probably going to vote for Trump again because I don't like the progressives. I think that like they go way too far, but I don't like their ideas. But at the same time, I don't really get along with the conservative ideas. I think that the conservative ideas would be bad for the country largely, but we can have those disagreements, And I really don't agree with the libertarian ideas. So that's why a lot of people like me feel lost, because it's really liberalism extends all the way from, I would say, the liberal establishment in the Democrats, and then it goes all the way over to like the conservatives and somewhat the libertarians, but kind of not really. So like the majority of the country is actually liberal in the way I define it, and yet the Democratic Party is just kind of like falling apart, even though they should have so much support. It's just kind of interesting.
And just us coming together to have this conversation is so paramount, because I think that this case, the lawsuit that you're the counsel for the plaintiffs, the DNC fraud lawsuit right now, I think that this case can truly be a bridge. I think that this case should bring, it doesn't matter if you're a Republican, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, it doesn't matter if you're conservative, it doesn't matter if you're a liberal. We should all be focusing on this right now. To me, this is one of the biggest stories going in the entire world right now. And I think that if they actually get this lawsuit to the courts and you have a fair trial, you could possibly be exposing one of the biggest stories of all time. So I'm just curious, what was it like with the backlash that you got just for doing this interview? And then on the other side of it, do you agree that this case...
in terms of the importance of this case, here's how I view it. When you're talking about this case, and I'm not advocating for civil war or anything like that, or government overthrow, but if the government can get away with rigging a primary, because even if you like give the, like it said in one of the videos earlier that I showed with Zach Haller, even if you give the Democrats like every benefit of the doubt, basically their best like possibility, their best outcome, if it goes to court, is like they win, and like the Democrats can basically choose whatever candidate they want, because they've made the argument that they don't have to provide a fair election. Actually, let me make sure I played that video, because in one of their it's 225, yeah, I played it. Okay. Oh no, I didn't. Here, let's go to this one, and I'm gonna play this for a little while, because he talks about what the arguments of the Democrats are, and this is why you should not be on board with the Democrats, and you should not vote for any liberal candidate at all, or really you should not vote for the DNC, any DNC candidate, because they're literally advocating against a democracy.
So what the Democrats have told the judge is that they have no legal obligation to actually run the party primary fairly, so they could have chose a candidate to favor, but they did not. So let me repeat, the Democrats see themselves as having no legal obligation to run the primary fairly, so they could have favored a candidate, but they did not.
First of all, I don't believe the bullshit that they didn't. But even if you do, like, they're saying they're just spitting in the faces of voters. Why would you vote for a party that thinks that they don't have to, their primaries don't have to be fair elections? Like, that's just stupid to take their side. And that is actually, like, the degrading of society, the degrading of the vote in general, where imagine if the Democrats and Republicans both feel like they can pick their own candidate and shove them down our throats, and that doesn't have to be a fair election, and we only get to choose between, in the generals then, and we basically get one of two choices that have both been shoved down our throats. Well, that's not an election at all. Like, that's not democracy. So that's quite interesting, and nobody should be on board with the Democrats. And honestly, if they can get away with this, there is an argument there for that the government has become so corrupted that it no longer works for the people. Because if that's not the ultimate corruption of the government and getting away from working for the people, then what is? And I honestly believe that if the parties can get away with the actions that the DNC is arguing for in court, you could, it wouldn't happen right away, but eventually a civil war would come. Well, if not a civil war, it would be like a toppling of the government.
And this story should be a communal point for all parts of the political
And I'm talking like, when Alex Jones says armed resistance, it would actually come to that at some point. Especially if can you imagine if this case goes into court and it blows up and everybody knows about it, and if people understood this case well, and then they found out that they don't have any say over what what candidate is chosen, that outside of the final general election, but by that time your candidates are so thin that you really didn't have as much of a say. The candidates really didn't come from the people. So that's just really interesting.
Spectrum in America.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and let me answer your question this way. I mean,
in my opinion, that's what armed resistance is actually for. When the government starts to act like this and becomes this blatant about it. But I don't think now is the right time for armed resistance, and I don't think even if the Democrats win this case and what I said comes true, I don't think now is the right time for armed resistance. Because you want to work within the system as long as possible until it's obvious that the system just can't be fixed. I still feel there's a chance that, like, when we voted for Trump, he was an outsider and we won. Trump got in and he's doing shit. He's doing things that he said he would do. And he's been one of the most honest politicians, most honest presidents that I've probably ever seen. He's fulfilling his promises like crazy so far. And, it shows that the people still do have a voice. And they can still vote in politicians to shake things up, and you don't have to resort to violence. But if if there's a court precedent on this, that the parties can basically act however they want and put in whoever they want, and their primaries don't have to be fair, that changes the ball game. And long term, there would have to be some sort of drastic measure taken.
For doing this interview. And then on the other side of it, do you agree that this case and this story should be a communal point for all parts of the political spectrum in America?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And let me answer your question this way. I mean, we got a huge backlash when we told folks we were going on InfoWars, because I think there's been a conscious attempt by the mainstream media to portray InfoWars in a certain light, and that has had an effect on a lot of people who are also members of our class and clients of ours who believe that InfoWars is simply about being some sort of right-wing or alt-right propaganda. And what I've tried to explain to people in the best way I can is that actually what is going on is more of a war for information. I mean, it's right in the title of InfoWars, between what the mainstream media has been shoving down our throats for so long and the truth. And
what he's actually saying here, in different words, it's that you might have heard before. It's not right versus left. It's, establishment versus outsider at this point.
InfoWars has been engaged in that battle for a long, long time, and I want to thank all of you for doing that. But right now, I think we're all on the same side, because this same mainstream media played a very, very vital role in the case that we're talking about, in the sense that they were working hand in glove with the DNC to push Hillary Clinton down the throats of this country, not just in the primaries, but in the general election. And we know how that turned out. And so they are, in a very strong sense, I believe, culpable here. And that explains the mainstream media blackout. And that explains why they won't cover our case. And, I think that explains why we all have to work together now, because we're in a war against the mainstream media.
Listen to that, DNC. Listen to that liberal establishment. You have fucking done the impossible. Congratulations. You have united the progressives within the Democratic Party with the libertarians and conservatives. When you do that, you done goofed.
I love what you said there. We're all on the same side. That's perfect, because it's so true. At the end of the day, we're all Americans.
Just think about it. Think of it. Something you always have to do. Put yourself like 6 years in the past. When Obama was elected in his first term, he was in his first term at that point, and just think about, would you ever imagine that the progressives would file, when they were pretty happy with Obama at the time, to be honest, they would end up filing a lawsuit against the DNC, who helped, basically destroy the progressive candidate and force the liberal candidate that's corrupted, and that would unite the progressives and the entire right, and also the liberals like me that aren't a part of the establishment in politics. I follow politics, but I'm just your average person, and we're all gonna unite together. And the lawyer of the lawsuit is going to, the media outlet he's gonna choose to get his message out. I can't even finish this without laughing. Is InfoWars. It's InfoWars has actually pushed out some ridiculous stories, and a lot of their stories got better around the Trump stuff. I'll say that. But like, they talk about like reptilian people, and like they used to, at times they would push some pretty crazy theories out there. And now this is where, you know, InfoWars has become more of a mainstream, and they've really toned down a lot of their conspiratorial stuff. And I don't mean conspiratorial in the way like Seth Rich or something. I'm talking about like lizard people stuff. And they really toned that stuff down, and they're trying to do like more actual mainstream stuff, but also include stuff like the Seth Rich murder and this DNC lawsuit and stuff that the mainstream media won't take on, but, you know, is actually reasonable. I actually really like where InfoWars has positioned themselves, because they cannot remain as popular as they are if they push, you know, crazy, ridiculous conspiracy theories. But if they push, you know, conspiracy theories that seem to have legitimacy to them, conspiracy in the non-derogatory sense, you know, then, because there are a lot of conspiracy theories that come true. Like, there actually was a Bay of Pigs invasion. There actually was, you know, well, MK Ultra. There actually was, you know, all these terrible scientific experiments, and there actually were the Philadelphia experiments. They actually did plan to, you know, fill a plane and with Americans and like shoot it down as a false flag operation, which eventually, you know, to get a war started, which eventually, you know, and that they never did it, but like these things were actually planned. You know, a lot of these things actually did happen. So, you know, if you use the term in conspiracy where just people in power, you know, basically use their influence to do something that others don't, you know, that isn't commonly accepted, or I don't know, however you want to define conspiracy, but everybody knows conspiracy theories in the non-derogatory sense. It involves like authorities basically abusing their power, and that happens all the time. We know it happens. So,
and we have all these hearings going on talking about Russia meddling. No, it was the Democrats the whole time. It was Hillary Clinton that was meddling. It was Hillary Clinton that stole the election from Bernie Sanders, who was clearly the popular candidate on the Democrat side. So it's just amazing for me to have seen the negative backlash that you got just for doing this interview, when we're all trying to get to the same truth here. We're all trying to figure out what went on. They're looking for meddling in the election. They're looking at Russia. No, we're looking right here internally, and we've got the evidence. We've got the facts, and you right now...
And the more InfoWars comes on and gives, like, they're honestly almost always fair to their guests. And so here you have a progressive guest and, a lawyer for representing progressives. And other progressives that, you know, have been anti-InfoWars are skeptical. But the more he gets treated fairly, and people are going to open up, and like progressives are only going to side more with InfoWars now because of this interview. And the more these interviews happen, the more progressives are going to come around on InfoWars. And the DNC is in big trouble if progressives start taking the side of the right.
Now are pursuing the truth, and I salute you for being the counsel for the plaintiffs in this DNC fraud lawsuit. You know, you're probably even putting your life on the line. I don't think I need to tell you that, but we got to go here. I just want to get a final word from you. What is your just overall analysis of everything we've discussed? What are you thinking is the overall analysis for what we've discussed so far, and then what do you see coming in the future?
All right, this is going to be the final couple minutes here. He's just gonna give a summary, and I wanted to say sorry this got so long, but I wanted to fit a lot of information in here. Thanks for watching. I'm gonna let him speak this out. But if you could share this, like, subscribe, that means a lot to me. A small YouTuber like me, every subscriber, makes my day. So I'll be probably posting more about these investigations, or about the DNC lawsuit in the future, and I post about all kinds of things that I think you'd be interested in.
Well, I just want to first salute you for doing this interview with me, because by protecting, by putting the light on this lawsuit and the people doing it, you're protecting us. And so we definitely are very, very concerned down here. We're concerned for our lives and our safeties and our families, our safety and our families. But by shining a light on us, and by everybody who's shining a light on us, you're protecting us and allowing us to press forward. So thank you, and I salute you for that. As for the overall analysis, I think the best legal analogy for our case is that this is the ultimate political Ponzi scheme. The DNC, and maybe our political system more generally, has been selling the concept of free and fair elections to the American public for a long, long time. And I think that illusion is dropping rather suddenly. So, our hope is that through our lawsuit, we can make a difference in restoring American democracy to the people.
Jared Beck, the counsel for the plaintiff.
So there you have it, guys. The lawyer here himself is saying that, this is the potentially, one of the greatest Ponzi schemes in history. And, the idea that we actually vote for our leaders when it's really just the parties are rigging elections and things like that. And that's what is on the line here. Can this be exposed? Or, can the judicial branch hold off the legislative branch? And there's some, executive branch stuff, but, and the deep state would be the executive branch. Can they all come... Can the judicial branch, balance the power here and basically restore government to the people to a large extent? Or, are these parties, and, this is mainly in the legislative branch, is it so strong that they're untouchable? And if they're untouchable, we've got big problems. And that leads to an armed overthrow of the government eventually. So hopefully we can get this solved in a peaceful manner. Have a good one, guys.